Western idea, right, which has been recast and modified for our purposes. And when I say recast, because many nation states in the West are monolingual entities with similar ethnicities. So America is a kind of monolingual nation. Britain, France, Germany, Italy are monolingual, monoethnic, largely states, which are imagined as national or nations. While in India, we have diversity of ethnicity and diversity of languages running into hundreds, right? So you cannot simply adopt Western notion of nation to the Indian context without modifying it, right, substantially. And such a modification started happening in late 19th century, mid 19th century onwards. Aesthetics is a Western category. Saundarya Shastra, right, is a Western category, and it was used in India to designate certain theories of art that existed long before India as a nation state emerged, right? So you find poetics or Kavya Shastra as a discipline emerging towards the turn of the millennium, first millennium, somewhere around 300 BC. And one of the important texts that has existed since then with us is Bharat's Natya Shastra, right? And we use aesthetics as equivalent for that, but that is not very accurate, because aesthetics is a modern discipline in the West, rising with German philosophy in Alexander Baumgarten, who coined the term aesthetics. And Kant later on developed a full-fledged theory of modern aesthetics, where aesthetics was a separate category of human existence from the ethical and from the scientific or rational. So we find this trifurcation of human life happening during Kant, right? So Kant wrote three important critiques in the 18th century. First was a critique of pure reason, where he explored the possibilities and non-possibilities or limitations of rationality, Enlightenment rationality. He also explored a possibility of practical reason, that is ethics, from a rational perspective, right? To what extent can you base ethics on reasoning rather than on authority of religious text or on external authorities? So ethics should be grounded, according to Kant, on human reasoning rather than on tradition. So birth of modern ethics coincides with Kantian critique of pure practical reason. And then the third critique was critique of judgment, where he talks about the autonomy of art and aesthetic judgment. So basically, Kantian project reveals us that aesthetic domain is separate from ethical and rationalist or philosophical one. So these are three separate domains according to Kant. Now this trifurcation did not exist even in ancient Europe. As if you look at Plato's theory of poetry, I'm sure you've heard of it, right? You've heard of Plato's ideas about poetry? Yes, no, maybe?
Yes, sir.
What have you heard of them?
Well, Plato was necessarily against the idea of the power that a poet holds, and he would rather say that philosophy should be, like philosophy is should be the usurper of throne kind of, not poetry, because poetry is basically thrice removed from reality, and uh, there is falsification of man and gods in there. So the poet should be banished from the society.
Right. So you can see that Plato's attack was on poetry, was not on aesthetic grounds. Right. It was on the grounds of ethics. It was on the grounds of political theory. It was on the ground of metaphysics that he had problem with poetry. Right. And so in his Republic, he would not admit poets. The reason being that poetry is falsification, right? So philosophically a suspect. It does not lead you to truth. So watching Harry Potter does not reveal any truth to you because all that is fictional. It does not really exist. So literature does not reveal truth, right? It takes you away from it. And that's why it is not considered as important but dangerous to public life in Plato's time. And Aristotle has to find a rational reason for continuation of poetry. And he gives medical reasons. He defends poetry on, again, political grounds by saying that because it purges people's negative emotion, it has a good impact overall on the life of the city, state, or polis. It purges, right? Catharsis. So Aristotle's defense as well as Plato's attack does not consider poetry as autonomous, right? As a separate domain separate from ethics or philosophy or science, right? Similarly, in India, if you consider ethics as dharma, right, and philosophy of all kinds like Adhyatma would be a kind of philosophical projects, then art and literature was not considered separate of that. So art, the basis of art or art was not seen as autonomous. It did not occupy a separate space. So if you look at great works of art in India, whether it is Taj Mahal or whether it is ancient music or dance, or if you look at ancient paintings, then you will see that religion and art is not considered to be mutually exclusive territories, right? So aesthetics in modern sense of word did not exist in India, right? Aesthetics or study of beauty, philosophical study of art and beauty did not exist in India. Instead, what we had were certain traditions of Shastras called Alankara Shastra or Kavya Shastra. And what do you understand by the term Shastra? Have you heard of the term Shastra?
Documentation.
No.
Study of something.
Study of something? Not exactly.
Study of like some scriptures maybe.
No, not exactly.
So the
Study of
scriptures itself.
philosophy or something.
Like philosophy, not exactly. See, Shastra is a discursive category, right? It's a category of discourse. And it consists of systematized knowledge, right? Authoritative systematized knowledge. What do you understand by authoritative systematized knowledge?
Like you cannot step out, you cannot go out of
Yeah,
place.
yeah, it is a kind of compulsive, right? It compels people to obey, right? Very good. So what do we understand by Shastra? And the term for literature was Sahitya or Kavya, right? Now, if you look at these terms, they are not equivalent simply to the idea of literature. Right. So if you ask me, there was no such thing like Indian literature, because the idea of literature, modern idea of literature, is a Western category, which derives from the word literatura, which means to write. Right. So जो कुछ लिखा गया है, जो आप पढ़ते हो, तो वो सब कुछ लिटरेचर कहलाता है. Anything that is written down, which you read, is considered literature. Right. So in a very broad sense of word, literature implies anything that is written or printed. So suppose you are working for in a factory of washing machine, or with a company that sells washing machine, then you may have to write a letter saying that please send us all literature on washing machine. Right, which means all the necessary information which is written down, brochures, manuals, its information about its circuit and so on, that would constitute as literature of your washing machine or fridge. That's the broad sense of the term literature. And in narrow sense, literature implies something which is a translation of the term le belle letters in France. French, le belle letters would mean elegant writing, right? Writing that evokes aesthetic pleasure is called literature. Elegant writing. Artistic writing which has got artistic aesthetic value is considered literature in the West. Now the problem with this term is that in India, ancient India, we did not have such kind of idea at all. Such kind of category did not exist. Word Sahitya means who is seen as a category of Vangmai. Right, it's one of the category of Vangmai, and Vangmai means anything that is blessed by goddess Saraswati or Vak. Vak or speech is considered sacred power. So anything that is blessed or has the grace of Saraswati is called Vangmai. That means anything that is verbal is considered Vangmai, right? So category of Vangmai would include entire verbal discourse. And it is not just elegant writing. I hope you get the difference between anything that is verbalized. So if I am speaking just now, and if there is grace of goddess Saraswati on my speech, then whatever I'm speaking is considered to be Vangmai. So Vangmai is a broader category, right, of entire linguistic discourse, which has a kind of special value to it. Does that make any sense? What is Vangmai? Is it still abstract?
Yes, sir. I mean, in ancient times, before before the writing and all that came in, even in other cultures, all of this was oral. I mean, poetry and all that was still oral. So in India, even that would be considered Vangmai. It would be a part of Vangmai, as in India. I am not sure if that was that the oral thing that went on before the writing started, was that still considered literature for the West?
So say for example, you are saying something right now that is also oral. Okay, I'm writing the spelling for you. Vangmai, right? Vangmai is anything that is graced by the goddess Saraswati, the muse in Indian context. Yeah, Dehini, what is the question?
It is just I'm a little confused. So anything that, as you said, graced by the goddess Saraswati. I mean, so
like a person would come and say that this has been graced by the goddess Saraswati, and then that becomes Vangmay?
No, it is not that random. Right now we are speaking, right? We are using Vak, right? But this Vak or Vani, right? Vak yani VAK Vak is the power of words, speech, power of speech, right? Is power of Saraswati. That is what Vak is. Vak is a Shakti. It's a power of speech is equal to the power of Saraswati. Now, if that is blessed with certain special qualities, then it becomes Vangmay. Right now we are speaking. If you go to canteen and say मुझे चाय दो तो वो Vangmay नहीं है, right? It is just talking. But if this talking has a certain cultural value to it, then it becomes Vangmay. It is not necessarily written. Okay, let me give you examples of Vangmay, and that will make things clearer for you. The most ancient Vangmay, right, begins in somewhere in 1500 BC before Christ, right? And one of the most ancient Vangmay is something called Rig Veda, right? Rig Veda is an Apurushaya Vangmay. That means it is not a creation of a human being. This Vangmay or those utterances or speech that is not produced by any human entity, right? So Rig Veda is, Ved means knowledge. So the most ancient example of Vangmay, and probably most valuable one very often, is a body of verbal texts which are not written down but transmitted orally from guru to shishya, from teacher, from acharya to shishya, and so on. This transmitted orally, right? And these texts are committed to memory, right? So these are memorized texts which are not produced by any human beings but by rishis. Right? Rishis were the seers or sages who articulated Vedas, but they were not produced by rishis. It was not produced by anybody. They are just the seers who reproduce this discourse, which is non-man-made discourse. And later on, this developed into 4 important texts. And when I say text, you have to remember this is not an oral text, right? And the term for this is Samhita. The 4 important Vedic texts are the Rig Veda, the Atharva Veda, Yajur Veda, and the Sam Veda. So Rig Veda is the most ancient non-human discourse, right? Followed by Samaved, which is knowledge about how to sing and perform Rig Veda, right? And the Ved is composed of mantras. And mantras are the special chants, right? Which are blessed by the divine goddess Saraswati, who also happens to be one of the important rivers of that region. Right, so goddess Saraswati is also one of the rivers of the region where these were composed. So the first Vangmay is Rig Veda, then you have Samaved, Atharva Veda, which is a kind of lot of scientific doctrines of those times, right? About how to bring about rains, how to increase your stock of cows, how to conquer enemies, how to win over women, and so on and so forth. How basically how to please gods. And the important gods of this first non-human discourse, non-human Vangmaya, are gods like Indra, who is one of the highest deities of that period. And you can see Indra is, you don't find temples of Indras these days, right? But Indra is one of the supreme deities of Vedic corpus or the body of texts. Followed by Agni, who is one of the most powerful deity because Agni or fire takes what human beings offer to God. So he is a kind of connection between God and man. And so he is God himself. And then you have gods like Varun, right? And gods like Ashwin Kumar, gods like Marut, right? Marut is a god, are the gods of wind. So you have these various deities which are not the exactly ones that you worship, that Hindus worship today, right? It was a pantheon of gods of various kinds, right? So Indra was also the god of rain, right? Surya was another very important deity, right? Worshipped in various forms. One of the important forms was Savitri or Savit. Savitri is one of the manifestations of sun in early morning. Usha or dawn was the goddess of that time. So you can see there are various gods and goddesses whom we, and you can see all of them are nature deities, deities of nature, and that's why it, according to the Western categories, it falls under something called animism. So the earliest body of text are the four Samhitas: Rigved, Atharvaved, Samved, and Yajurved, right? And Yajurved has again two parts. One part is called Shukla Yajurved, and other is the good Yajurved and the dark Shwet Yajurved and Shukla kind of thing. Dark and light. And in dark
Black
Yajurved,
and white.
So what is
Yeah.
that called? Shukla and Krishna, yeah. Krishna is the
Shukla
dark.
and Krishna.
Yeah, Krishna and Shukla. So Krishna Yajurved is the dark one. So these are the four important texts. And by text we mean oral compositions which are retained by people over a period of time. And we are talking about something which is 3 millennia old, older than 3.5 millennia, right? Then comes, then as the time passed, there were other additions made to the Vedic body. And it was called Aranyaka, right? And Aranyaka are the forest discourses, which is very late development in Vedic history. And Aranyaka and Upanishads are the later developments. And Aranyaka means something that is composed in forest discourses, and Upanishads means a kind of sitting near your guru, but it also means certain kind of esoteric knowledge that is not open for all, something that is concealed from everybody, that is hidden. It cannot be passed on from one section to entire masses, right? So these are components of Vedic Ugra, and everything together is called Veda or Vedic literature, right? And all this is not considered to be man-made. It is all non-man, right? Apurusheya. Does that make any sense? It is considered as apurusheya, not created by any person. Not to be confused with Quran and Bible, which uses the word revelation. Revelation in Christianity and Abrahamic religion is very different, right? It's like the prophet, whether it's Muhammad or Son of God, Christ, who reveals God's words, right? Not like that. This is discourse which is non-human. It is supra-human, supranatural. There is no agent who has created this. It is authorless text. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
What was the last thing that you heard?
That these are
About
not
revelation,
the
yeah.
same as the Bible, which is a revelation, and these are authorless texts.
So Vedic corpus or Vedic body, Ved means knowledge, is authorless text, right? Apurusha. So this is one part of Vangmaya, right? The other part is that which is created by sages, right? Only, right? Rishis. And there are Rishis even in the Vedic text, but they are not seen as creators of that. But then Rishis are considered creators in another category of discourse. And that category is called Smruti, right? The first is authorless discourse, which is heard discourse. It is called Shruti, Suna Gaya. जो सुनने से मिलता है, Shruti, heard. The other is creation of Rishis called a Smruti, or something which is based on the memory of a person. And such things include two important subcategories. One is called Itihas, right, or history, like the Mahabharata, created by Vedvyas, or Valmiki's Ramayana. Now, all these are considered as Itihas. Itihas means ऐसे हुआ था, right? And not to be confused with the modern category of history. It is ancient Indian term, Itihas. ऐसे हुआ था, right? It has a truth value to it. So it's not that it requires any evidence which is empirical. If 18 days war has happened, it has happened. It is not questioned. It's not questionable because it's product of Rishis or the divine beings who are blessed. So Ramayana and Mahabharata. These are two important examples of Itihas, which is a subcategory of Smruti. Now, Smruti has one more category called the Puran, right? And in that, you have all sorts of discourses. As the name implies, Puran yani Bahut Purana, Prachin. Something that happened long time ago. Creation of this universe, dissolution of this universe, birth of gods, birth of demons, birth of wars between gods and humans, and all those things. So Itihasa and Purana together constitute a discourse called Smruti, याद रखा. And the Shruti is that which you have heard. And that includes Vedic corpus, right? And Vedic corpus consists of the Vedic Samhitas, Aranyaka, and Upanishads, right? And Vedic Samhitas are of 4 kinds. That is Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Atharva Veda, and Sam Veda. With me till now, any questions with what we? Yeah, I'm having a class just now. But anything? Good. So, can you come after 15 minutes or so? How is it otherwise? All well? Okay, so I'll just finish this class. Yeah. So far with me, any questions about what I have said? Doubts? कुछ समझ में नहीं आया?
Sir, I have a small doubt. So if I understand correctly, Wangmai would like something would be Wangmai if it has certain conditions fulfilled, right? So like it being like written or like created by something which is non-human is one of the conditions, and it being like written produced by sages would be the second condition. So okay. Thank you.
And non-human discourse is the Vedic discourse, right?
Okay. Yeah.
That is also called Shruti Parampara. Parampara means there is something that you hand over to the next generation. It's called Parampara. You take something and you hand it over to the next generation. That is tradition, as we call it, Parampara, right? And what is handed down? What do you think is handed down?
Tradition.
What is handed down? That is, parampara is something that is handed down from one generation to another. Right? So in case of Vedic parampara, what is handed?
Knowledge.
Knowledge. Knowledge of all kinds. We'll look into that later. Right? The third category, right? First is Shruti, which is heard, not created by human or Purusha. Second is that which is created by divine humans, Rishis, and is called Itihasa and Puran, right? And Mahabharata, Ramayana, Bhagavad Puran, Matsya Puran, Vishnu Puran, Shiv Puran, Garud Puran, all these Puranas are part of that tradition. Now there is a difference between the two. Difference is that though Rishis are involved, Itihasa and Purana is open for all sections of society. While Shruti knowledge of Vedic knowledge is reserved for people of the first 3 Varnas, right? And Varna system is one of the core social organization of the Vedic culture. And in Rig Veda, there is something called Purusha Sukta, in which it talks about how Purusha was born. Purush does not mean male, man, right? Purush means the first person, first being. And that first being, out of the mouth of the first being came Brahmanas. From the thighs of the first being came Vaishyas, or people who farm and people who trade, right? From the shoulders of the first being came Kshatriyas, or the warriors, or the 5 rulers and warriors, and from the legs came the Shudras, or the servants. So it's a 4-tiered hierarchical arrangement that was visualized in the Vedic text. Now this 4 layers or 4 strata of society, right? Later on somehow became part of jati system. By jati, you mean your caste, right? Caste means that whatever status you have in the society, in whichever part of Varna you exist, is dependent on your birth. So your parents' jati will be your jati, and so on and so on. Child born of Brahmin is a Brahmin, child born of Shudra is Shudra, child born of... So this system is different from this Varna system. Varna system was based on one's prakriti and dharma, person's own nature, right? And the theory of Varna goes something like this. It says that the entire universe is, or entire prakriti is made up of 3 characteristics, right? And those 3 characteristics are sattva, rajo, and tama. Sattva means something that is being, something that is true. Rajas means something that is full of light and energy. And tamas means something which is dark and inert. The whole nature is divided into these 3 parts, prakriti. And this idea comes from a philosophy called Sankhya philosophy, right? And these 3 parts determine individuals' prakriti as well. So individual also will be having these 3 gunas or these 3 characteristics. So all of us, according to that theory, has these 3 elements. One is sattva, the beingness, truth, you can say, rajas, which means energy, light, and tamas, which is darkness or inertia. And one of these is predominant, and that decides your place in Varna system, right? So person who has got more sattva gun in him is Brahman. One who has got more rajo gun in him is Kshatriya and Vaishya, while person who has got more tamo gun in is Shudra. That's the theory of Varna, right? And whether it is by birth or not became one of the biggest headaches and fights, which has started 2,500 years ago and it's still ongoing. Aaj bhi jhagda usi pe se. So the system today is called Varna Jati system, right? It is mixture of both Varna and Jati. So you also have a Jati that is decided by your birth, and Varna is your status in this 4 things, right? So Shruti traditions or Apurusheya traditions or the Vedic traditions were limited to the first 3 Varnas. They were not meant for Shudras. They were also probably not meant for women, but then certain women we do have who are involved in philosophical discourses in the Vedic scripture itself, like Maitreyi and Gargi and others. But the point is that it was not open for all, right? It was meant for the elite first 3 part of the society. While the Smruti traditions, that is Itihas and Purana traditions, were open for all. That means Ramayana and Mahabharata and Bhagavad is open for entire society. Anybody can have access to it. But the Vedic scriptures are accessible only when you undergo something called second birth. And that second birth is people who got second birth are called the Dvijas. And Dvija यानी दूसरा जिसका birth हुआ है वो, और दूसरा birth यानी rites of initiation, जनोई कहते हैं ना. So when that sacred thread is given, it's believed that you are born again, right? And only first 3 Varnas who have this initiation can access Vedic text under a guru or acharya. So first you have to do that, and then after that rite of initiation, you are initiated into that Vedic discourse. Anyone has to say something about Varna Jati system? Now, obviously, it is extremely unfair by modern standards, right? That some people are, how do you decide somebody's nature and so on and so forth? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Can you hear?
Yes, sir.
Nothing? सब समझ में आ गए?
So when you talked about the four divisions in the क्या बोलते हैं? The caste system thing, but like in theory, which was before.
Right? सिर्फ
So
सुनने से कुछ नहीं होगा।
I
बोलो।
can't. Okay, so the last one which you said, what was it? The darkness.
Yeah, तमो गुण।
So is it,
Tamo-
does it mean like being inherently evil or something?
Inherently,
Evil or something like the darkness? No?
मतलब हमारे में है नहीं यहाँ पे। Evil वाला Christian idea है और वो goes back to Judaic Abrahamic religions. So good and evil ये सब हैरी पॉटर में आते हैं, हमारे में नहीं। Right? Tamas means darkness, which means inertia. So a person who has got excessive tamogun is a person who is inert, lazy, or does not have enough of energy or sattva in him, essence in him. Remember, all this is absolutely scientifically nonsense, right? It doesn't have any scientific value. But this was what people believed, and that became a bone of contention. So you have got hold of two categories of Vangmaya. One is Vedic Vangmaya, which is open for the first three Varnas, and Shruti Smriti traditions of Ramayana, Mahabharata, Puran, which is open for all society, which is produced by Rishis. That is the Smriti tradition, Shruti or Smriti. Right? So far with me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
There is a third category now of Vangmaya, in which Rishis give knowledge to people, right? Very often. This is the knowledge meant for people, ordinary people, not just, what should I say? So Rishis would be giving this knowledge to people. So it may not be divinely created entities like Rishis only. So if you belong to first Varnas and you may not be a Rishi, then this is knowledge for you, right? And that knowledge is of two types. It's called Shastra. So Shastra is a knowledge, is a core knowledge, largely about various aspects of human life, which are enshrined in Vedic texts, right? Though there are four important purposes of human life according to the Vedic framework, right? And there are four ends of human life. First end of human life is called Dharma. Now, Dharma is not at all equivalent to religion. Dharma is a very complex idea. It means duty, but it also means duty to your own guna, right? Which means your actions should be consistent to your gun. So if your chief guna is sattva and you are Brahmin, then your actions should be consistent to Brahmin's actions. And this is the idea of Swadharma, right? which is a very important idea. But dharma does not mean religion. It means something that defines who you are. Right? So if you are a thief, then your dharma is to steal. Your actions being consistent to your nature. Mhm. So चोर का धर्म होता है चोरी करना. I hope you get what I'm saying. आग का धर्म होता है जलाना. पानी का धर्म होता है बहना. So dharma also means characteristics, innate characteristics which define who you are. So it is both normative and it is descriptive at the same time. Yeah, Rushi, go ahead. It's a very complex idea.
Sir, but it is very easy to confuse the idea of dharma with prakriti.
Huh. Prakriti is three guna, right? Sattva, Raja, Tama. And we are part of Prakriti, so we also have one of these characteristics as predominant, right? So Rushi may have Sattva Guna as a predominant characteristic, which, according to the theory of Varnas, make him Brahmin. Now his action should be consistent to that. If he doesn't act or do karma, which is consistent with his dharma, then you are not a Brahmin. Your action should also be that of Brahmins, right? I hope you get that. Because you are part of Prakriti. Now, all these are theoretical models that existed in those days. Yes, Soumya.
I think you cannot confuse dharma with prakriti because I think your dharma depends upon your prakriti. It's that sort of a connection. If I have more sattva gun, that makes me a brahman. So as a brahman, मेरा ये धर्म है. तो इसलिए धर्म.
Correct. So you have to act consistent to your Prakriti.
Yeah.
Dharma. Right. So that is one definition. Now it's a very complicated notion. It also means dharayati iti dharma, which means it's something which supports you, right, or supports the society, right? So there is also something called apad dharma, or dharma which is that of emergency and crisis, where you can go against your prakriti, right? But it is, the point that I'm making is it's not consistent with religion, as belief in God and worship karo or puja karo or path karo or ritual. That is not what it means, right? That is aspects of pantha according to ancient things. So the shastras that I'm talking about are about various aims of human life. The first basic aim is dharma, right? Second is something called artha. Artha means increase in your income. And in those days, largely the income was agricultural land based. So increase in your land and cows and fields and farm would be increasing your wealth, right? So artha means that land basically. So artha shastra is theory of artha, and one of the most ancient and renowned arthashastra is by Kavirya, right? Kavirya Shastra, which is not the same as economy. It is more a shastra or systematized knowledge for people who want to increase their land holding. And one of the most important landholder was the king. So how will king go on expanding his circle, right? How to use spies, how to kill people, how to create enmity among friends and friends among enmity, how to make allies so as to expand your land and country. So that is artha, right? And then there is kama. Kama means something that you want, pleasure, right? So in an expansive sense, it's about pleasure, joy, happiness, something that you desire, right? So desire for pleasure and joy is seen as kama, right? And one of the most oldest and important existing shastra is the Kam Sutra by Vatsayan, right? Which tells you about what are the right ways of, or what are the best ways of having sex and reproduction. Because if you don't reproduce, you won't have the society. So reproduction and Kama was taken extremely seriously in those days, right? And finally, the largest body, probably not largest, but quite big, is Moksha Shastra, would be the various philosophical systems of achieving moksha. And what did we mean by moksha was that you are out of cycles of birth and rebirth. Human life is not the single life. You are born again and again and again in various wombs and various vaginas. So say yoni कहते हैं. So you are in Manushya Yoni, you may go over next life into dog's Yoni or whatever, depending on your karma. So this cycle of births and rebirths is called wandering, bhatakna. And the Sanskrit term for wandering through cycles of birth and rebirth is called samsara, right? It also means our material existence. And everything that involves cycles of birth and rebirth. So those deeds which help you to get out of cycles of birth and rebirth would be good deeds. And those deeds that perpetuate your birth and rebirth are called bad deeds, right? So you can see how ideas of good and bad are tied to certain metaphysical, eschatological beliefs of this tradition that we are talking about. So Shastra would be about all these things. Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, Shastras of all kinds. Shastra can also be about Vedanga, of various ancillary knowledge systems around Veda, right? Like grammar, like Jyotish, like mathematics, right? So Ganit or Jyotish or Vyakarana or etymology of words are called Vedanga or the rings of Vedas, right? So that is another part of Vangmay, right? And finally comes Kavya. So you have 3 types of Vangmay. 4th is Kavya, which is by human being for human being, right? So Kavya is by a human being for a human being. Like so human beings like Kalidas, like Bhas, like Ashva Ghosh, like Bhavabhuti, like Tulsidas, like Kabir, right? So Kavya is a domain of discourse which is about human beings by and for human beings, right? So now we have 4 categories of Vangmay. First, the Vedic, Shruti Vangmay, limited to first 3 Varnas. Smruti, that is Itihas Purana, right, which is open for all. Third is Shastra, by Rishis for human beings. So you have something like Manav Dharma Shastra or Manu Smruti, Yagnavalka Smruti, right? So these Smrutis written by various Rishis were considered as Dharma Shastra. Am I audible? Can you?
Now you are, sir. Before you were not audible.
Hello, am I? Yes, sir.
Sir, your
ये
voice is
कथा के बारे में।
breaking a lot.
Can you hear me?
No, your voice is breaking a lot. And he left.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So what was the last thing that you? Because there were several calls.
You were at the third category of Vangmay.
All this Shastra. Shastra
No,
is the
the
third.
fourth.
And the fourth
Yeah.
is Kavya, right? And that which has that verbal utterance which is meant primarily for aesthetic purpose, right, is called Kavya. Which is, it's a kind of ukti, ya bolna, jo, which is meant for poetic, artistic impact, is called Kavya. So you have got the four categories of Vangmay, right? So if you imagine Vangmay as a circle and you have four sub-circles which are not concentric, right? Which are arranged in Venn diagram, ऐसे चार circle अंदर. तो एक श्रुति है, एक स्मृति है, एक शास्त्र है और एक काव्य. So these are the four kinds of Vangmay, right? And one of it is considered to be Kavya. So what we call literature is called Kavya. Now Kavya is not to be understood as poetry because Kavya is theater as well, right? Drushya Kavya and Shravya Kavya. Kavya that you can see in front of you being performed as in Natya, right? Is Drushya Kavya, देखने वाला काव्य. श्रव्य काव्य यानी सुनने वाला काव्य, यानी कवि या कोई परफॉर्म करता है और आप सुनते हो. So what is to be, neither of these imply literature meant to be read like you have in the West. I hope you get the difference between the idea of kavya and literature. Closest idea to kavya can be poesis in Greek. Poesis is something like made up discourse, बनावट, बनाया गया हुआ, verbal discourse, right? And poesis पर से poetry आता है, मगर poetry को हम verse मान लेते हैं, but it's not to be confused. Kavya can be both prose and words, and can be combination of both. If kavya includes both prose and verse, it is called champu kavya, right? So kavya as a category is very different from literature as a category. Is the whole point of this discourse that we had today. Any questions that you want to ask before we stop? No questions, सब समझ में आ गए यार, आप लोग बहुत विद्वान भी होते जा रहे हो दिन प्रतिदिन. Okay, anyway, so before we get our next class will be maybe after Deepta completes hers. So I just want to talk about these 4 essays that we are going to do in this unit. The first is Sanskrit literary culture from inside out, which discusses all the points that we have discussed today. but much more than that, right? In the historical context. It's a longish kind of essay by Sheldon Pollock, which we will discuss. दूसरा essay है Sanskrit Poetics, which is literary criticism in Sanskrit, right? Third is on ancient Tamil poetics by A.K. Ramanujan. That we have included because our idea of India should not be confused with Sanskrit. Sanskrit सिर्फ एक ही language नहीं थी इंडिया में. इंडिया में बहुत सारी languages, बहुत सारे times है, मगर हमारा perception Indian is equal to Sanskrit होता है. In order to break that prejudice or bias that Indian equals Sanskrit, we'll also take a look at Tamil poetics, right? Kavya Shastra, based on Tolkapiyar, one of the oldest poetic texts in Tamil. And finally, we'll also discuss aesthetics of Dalit literature, which is a kind of interrogation of upper caste literature that we have been thinking of, and upper caste canons of criticism that we have been thinking. So we are opening up the idea of Indian to include things which are non-Sanskrit as well, right? And this will help you greatly in your next set examination, where you will have a substantial or at least some component of Sanskrit poetics and Indian aesthetics, right? So I want you to decide who will make presentations on this essay, right? And put it in the group. The first one is a bit longish essay, so maybe 3 people can work on it. Others can be done by 2 people. So around, say for example, 9 people can work on this unit. So I want those people who are interested to take this up. It will be a preparation for your next slit as well. Done?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
No questions?
Sir, I guess there are a lot of Sanskrit ID students here, so I mean we have been reading all this since the last semester.
But now we are going to do it very systematically, right? In a historical context.
Yeah, the context has certainly changed, but the knowledge, the terms are similar.
You want information but not knowledge. We are aiming for knowledge. Difference between information and knowledge is how do you understand it in its context and how you can apply it, use it, think through it, right? A square plus B square is equal to A square plus 2AB plus B square is information, not knowledge really. But when you know what to do with it is called knowledge, right? Or where it came from, why it came from.
Yeah,
Done?
so in ID Sanskrit, we are getting knowledge, but in a different way, and this is a different kind of knowledge. So yeah.
Okay, but not everyone has ID Sanskrit, right? So how many of you had new information today? New understanding. Something that you are not.
Sir, we are not able to hear you, sir.
These lines. Yeah, Pooja. Who else? Rushi. him. And how many of you are already uh,
Sir, you're not audible.
you